There's a kid in every elementary school class photo who nobody remembers giving anyone trouble. Never sent to the principal's office, never threw a fit in the cereal aisle. By age 7, this kid was already packing their own lunch, remembering permission slips, showing up with their shoes tied, and a specific, practiced kind of calm on their face that adults love to call mature for their age. Report cards said, "An absolute pleasure to have in class." And across years of teaching that kid, not one adult ever paused long enough to ask why a 7-year-old had gotten so unnervingly skilled at needing nothing. The story usually starts here, and it doesn't start with yelling or bruises anyone could point to. It starts with a particular kind of silence that keeps getting mistaken for maturity year after year by people who genuinely mean well. And to be clear, since this part tends to get misunderstood, this isn't only about the extreme cases. Plenty of neglected kids grew up in tidy houses with 2 employed parents and a dog, and a perfectly decent school district where the issue was never cruelty, just distraction. A parent scrolling through a phone during the one conversation that actually mattered, or answering, "How was your day?" with half an ear already somewhere else. Small, repeated, forgettable moments, none of which would hold up on their own as evidence of anything. Stack enough of them across enough years, though, and a kid quietly absorbs a lesson no parent ever meant to teach, that their inner life is basically optional information. Psychologists have a name for this now: childhood emotional neglect, CEN for short. What makes it so easy to miss is that nothing dramatic has to happen for it to take hold. No yelling, no visible bruises, just an absence that never really announces itself. The light stayed on. There was usually food in the fridge. So, when these kids grow up and start typing, "Why do I feel empty for no reason?" into a search bar at 1 o'clock in the morning, they rarely land on an explanation. Absence doesn't leave a mark you can hold up to a mirror and point at. What tends to surprise people is what happens next inside these kids, not around them. Kids raised in emotionally thin households rarely turn withdrawn or difficult. Far more often they get freakishly good at reading a room. Nobody sits them down and teaches them empathy for this. Their nervous system just figures it out fast, the way you'd expect any system built for survival to figure things out fast. A parent's jaw tightening before dinner became data. A quiet car ride home became a warning worth memorizing. No 6-year-old consciously decides to start monitoring the emotional weather of every adult in the house. It happens underneath language, the way you learn to catch yourself before a trip on the stairs, and then it never really switches off. Which is how you end up with grown adults who will slice a hand open on a barbecue grill and insist through visible pain that it's seriously fine. Don't worry about it, while quietly doing math on whether they can drive themselves to urgent care without inconveniencing anyone. Some of them are the friends who apologize before asking for a favor. Others are the coworkers who say yes to everything and then sit alone in their car afterward, wondering why their chest feels tight for no obvious reason. And a fair number are partners who go rigid the moment someone tries to take care of them, because being looked after when you're not used to it tends to trigger a threat assessment instead of actual relaxation. There's something almost funny, honestly, about how impressive these people look from a distance. The ones who never forget a birthday, and who somehow always have a spare granola bar in their bag for someone else's kid. That competence was a performance that kept them safe growing up. Nobody claps for a kid who needs less. So, a lot of them just learned to need less, got remarkably good at it, and now, decades later, a therapist gently asks what they'd actually like for dinner, and they stare back like they've just been handed a differential equation to solve on the spot. There's usually a voice that comes with all of this too, running quietly in the background, and it rarely sounds dramatic. It sounds practical. Don't make this a bigger deal than it is. Other people have it worse. You're fine. Just get on with it. That voice is basically a leftover strategy on autopilot, borrowed straight from childhood, from a time when minimizing your own needs out loud was genuinely the safest available option. Kids don't invent that voice on their own. They absorb the general temperature of a house and then spend the next 30 years running it internally on a loop long after the original house is gone. This is roughly the point where feelings and physiology stop being separate conversations. In the early 2000s, researchers Charles Nelson, Charles Zena, and Nathan Fox ran what became known as the Bucharest Early Intervention Project, following children who had spent their earliest years in Romanian institutions with almost no consistent one-on-one caregiving. Using EEG scans, they found these children showed measurably reduced brain activity compared to children raised in families. And the earlier a child was moved into a stable, attentive foster placement, the more that brain activity recovered over time. These aren't just feelings people are describing loosely in a therapy session. They show up as literal electrical patterns in a developing brain, visible on a scan. The nervous system keeps something like attendance on how much attention it's allowed to expect, and it quietly builds its whole architecture around whatever number it lands on. That finding reframes a lot of things people have spent years feeling quietly ashamed of. Hyperindependence, looked at this way, reads less like a personality trait and more like an old adaptation, still running on a body that's technically safe now, but hasn't caught up to that fact yet. Someone who tenses up at kindness likely spent their whole childhood learning that needing things out loud didn't get met, so handling everything alone quietly became the safer bet, and the habit just never got the memo to stop. And the exhaustion that shows up around people who are emotionally a lot, that's often somebody who had to parent their own feelings long before they were tall enough to reach the top shelf. And taking on someone else's emotions now feels like an unpaid second job nobody asked them to apply for. None of this is a life sentence dressed up in clinical language for what it's worth. Brains that adapted to scarcity can adapt again to something steadier, though usually slower than anyone wants, and with more false starts than any highlight reel of therapy ever shows. In those same Romanian studies, recovery wasn't just about removing the deprivation. It depended on steady, attentive, almost boring, everyday care replacing it. Not grand gestures, just somebody showing up the same way on the same days over and over until a nervous system quietly updates what it expects from the people around it. So, if you were that kid, the easy one, the low-maintenance one, the one nobody ever worried about, you didn't get lucky. You got skilled early and quietly at surviving an environment that didn't have room for whatever you actually needed. And if you're still catching yourself apologizing for taking space, or thanking someone for the bare minimum, or bracing slightly whenever someone is kind to you for no clear reason, that habit really just evidence of how closely you were paying attention back when nobody else in the room was. There was never anything wrong with you for needing more than you got. You simply did the math a kid does without ever meaning to, and landed on the safest possible number. Somewhere down the line, that number is allowed to change. One last thing before you go. If any of this felt familiar, there's a workbook I created pinned in the comments below built for exactly that. It's called the Childhood Healing Workbook. 31 pages, self-guided, helping you name the patterns your childhood left behind. Not to relive anything, just to finally see it clearly enough to stop it running your life. Inside, you'll find a childhood experiences inventory, attachment-style exercises, inner child journal prompts, family pattern map, emotional needs checklist grounded in real psychology, Bowlby, Neff, Jerkovich, and Bowen. No jargon, no diagnosis, just a structured mirror. Links in the description too. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on my future uploads.